Welcome back to this very special episode of Rich Lessons. I am super excited to have a good friend of mine, Takema Robinson, on today to talk about all the things. I consider Takema a storyteller, an advocate, a producer, an executive producer now, and we'll get into that a little bit later. With an impassioned mission to turn pain into purpose, Takema has spent over 2 decades using storytelling, production, and cultural advocacy to drive social change. Her work has been pivotal in amplifying nationwide awareness of injustices impacting Black communities. Takema leadership in AJ Owens' case led to a landmark 2024 verdict, reigniting the national conversation on the impact of stand your ground laws. Alongside AJ's mother, she co-founded the Standing in the Gap Fund, supporting families navigating the trauma of race-based violence through financial relief and healing. Through her company, High Cotton Production, Robinson brings powerful untold stories to life. In collaboration with Message Pictures, Soledad O'Brien Productions, and Park Pictures, she executive produced The Perfect Neighbor, which premiered at the 2025 Sundance Film Festival and won Best Director for U.S. Documentary. Also, as a founder and CEO of Converge Consulting, Takema has also directed over 100 billion, would it be, in philanthropic investments toward movement and racial justice organizations. Her creative and strategic leadership continues to inspire transformative approaches to justice, healing, and culture across America. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're so excited to have you on. I was like, you know what? We have to make this interview happen. I have been all on my TikTok, my threads, watching the response to not only just like beautiful storytelling, but just like powerful evoking of like emotion, right,
Yes.
across the world to AJ's story. But I want to, before we get into that, I really want to start from the top, right? We always like to get a little bit of background about our guests, where they're from, what started them on this journey. Was it a moment in their life? Was it, an introduction to someone? Tell us your origin story, Takema.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you both for having me here. It feels really good to be having this conversation in community. We've been all over the world, but it makes a difference to kind of come home, and I'm excited to spend the time with you. So my origin story. I was born in New Haven, Connecticut in the 70s, in the midst of the Black Power movement. Folks don't know New Haven was the site of one of the major um, cases against the Black Panther Party. And both my parents were involved as just young people in the city. And my grandmother was also a local politician at the time. So for me, I feel like I was born into movement. And so, and that I think has shaped my life. This idea that our lives are for service and our lives are to be committed to our community and to serve our community. So I think that is my literal origin story. You know, I was born into that space. And I think throughout my life, I've continued to follow that path. I went to Howard University after spending a lot of time in pretty private schools, pretty white private schools in Connecticut. And so my rebellion was to go to Howard and not stay home and go to Yale. And it saved my life. You know, I needed it. I needed to be exposed to culture. I think what was already burning inside of me through the experiences that I had as a young person going to a predominantly white institution and trying to figure out who I was during that time. I needed Howard. So I was an African American studies and political science major. My parents were like, how's that going to go together? And what's that going to mean when you grow up?
Hmm.
And I also, at the same time, pursued a master's degree in art history. I was always really interested in the ways in which culture shaped the political ethos. So my master's thesis was on the photography of the civil rights movement and how that moved the world to change. So I've always been interested in the intersection between social justice and art. And throughout my life, whether it was as a curator, as an arts educator, as an educator, or as a social justice leader, I've always been trying to connect the dots between policy change and culture.
Mhm.
Yeah, and storytelling is one of the most powerful ways of doing that, which you have clearly done an amazing job at doing. Um, Based off what you majored in, and even for grad school, at what point did, because you did talk about photography, but at what point did you pick up the camera and say, this storytelling is going to be through film?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'm this is really my first forte in documentary. I am actually trained as an art curator. So a lot of my expression of this work has been more in museum exhibitions. I've curated several exhibitions in major museums and also, as an independent curator. My family are filmmakers. So both my sister-in-law and my brother were filmmakers, and so my family is kind of full of art activists. So film was their medium. And I have a high appreciation for it because, as I mentioned, my medium was photography. So my medium was the still image. Their medium was the moving image. And so for this particular story related to AJ, which I'll talk about in a few, it just made sense for it to be a movie given the material we were working with, which was this police body cam footage, which was already moving image. So it made sense to partner with them to bring AJ's story to life through the material that we had.
Absolutely. And although you hadn't really explored storytelling through film, you are very much so a storyteller through your work. And I love this idea of how you use storytelling as a tool for healing and a weapon for change. And even before this tragic incident occurred, you were doing that in your work. And so I would think it was just like, oh, you're the perfect person for to bring the story to the world. But how has you utilizing storytelling for a tool for healing and weapon for change allowed you to come to this place where we are today and now a filmmaker in your own right?
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I guess I should tell a little bit about the story of how the material came because that actually dictated like our choice to make the movie. The footage for The Perfect Neighbor, which we're talking about, came to us through a FOIA request. So it was actually at my organizing and my advocacy work that brought the footage to us. We were actually looking in the wake of AJ Owens, who was my sister's best friend, who was murdered by her white neighbor in Ocala, Florida, in June of 2023. Shortly thereafter, we discovered that the woman who had murdered her had made over 21 phone calls to the police over the course of 2 years, complaining about children, literal children, in the neighborhood playing and by her definition, harassing her. And so, as we were advocating for AJ, advocating for the arrest of Susan Lawrence, who killed her in front of her children, advocating for the right charges to be applied in this case, which we really felt was premeditated based on the footage that we had available to us. We knew that we had to keep AJ's story out in the media, and we knew it was going to be sort of a multifaceted advocacy strategy, right? First, we need an arrest because this woman was claiming stand your ground. Second, we need to advocate and organize for the criminal charges, but there was also an opportunity for us to go to the Department of Justice. So originally, when we used the Freedom of Information Act to obtain the body cam footage for all of the calls that Susan Lawrence made to antagonize and weaponize the police against this community, we looked at that footage. We thought we were chopping it up. We were going to make it available to media, maybe some investigative journalists, and then also use this footage to make our case at that point to the Biden-Harris Department of Justice, sort of get them interested in filing DOJ hate crime charges, right? So it started in advocacy. It started in our organizing. And then my sister, Geeta Gondabir, who is the director of The Perfect Neighbors, married to my brother, looked at the footage and realized that there was really a film here. Geeta also won an Emmy for When the Levees Broke, which a lot of people know about. She's about 5 Emmys in, a Peabody Award. She's highly decorated director. And funny enough, throughout our lives, we always said we would work together at one point or another. We knew we both had like a heart for social justice, a heart for using storytelling to bring important stories to life. We never knew it would be in this way.
Mhm.
So anyway, Geeta began to look at the film, spent some time with it, and really thought that there was a bigger story, a movie in the footage. And so what you see is a combination of the police body cam footage, the interrogation footage, some of the B-roll that we shot on the ground when we were documenting the story, because I did have a film crew following the advocacy efforts that I was leading. And so that is what really makes up The Perfect Neighbor. You see more of the part of the story we never see, right? What led up to what happens on the night of the interrogation, which is super interesting, I think, for people to see what happens in that space. And then finally the trial, which ended up in Susan Lawrence receiving 25 years for manslaughter.
Yeah, some people said that they had to go ahead and look it up because their heart couldn't take not knowing how it was going to end. And I was like, yes, I remember getting one of the preview screenings and being in the room, and no one in the room could hold back tears. And I just thought in my head, now Takema Morgan did not prepare us for this, but you have to walk through it, right? You have to take that journey. And I think every journey brings wherever you're at today and whatever your lived experiences have been,
Yes.
that journey really brings you full circle. And I think that's why it was emotional for me, and I'm sure for so many others. Now, let's go back to the day you received the call, I'm assuming from your sister,
Mhm.
that AJ had been killed. I remember the
Yep.
time frame you were texting our group chats, you were posting on Instagram. Your immediate reaction was so powerful and so widespread that I would love to just go back to that moment. And how was that for you, and hearing that and knowing that, oh, I have to get up and do something.
Yeah. Well, Sheena and Savitra, I think like, I'm a big sister. And then throughout this process, I've had to define myself as that because that's how I received the call. I received the call with my little sister on the other side of the phone, devastated. The children who people see in the film that night were brought to her home. So here she is. It's 5 o'clock Saturday morning, just hours after AJ's been pronounced dead. The children are with her in her house, in her bed, and she doesn't know what to do. So I received that phone call as a big sister. And I don't know about you, but in my family, we ride at dawn,
Mhm.
right? Like there is
Yeah.
that was activated,
Yeah.
immediately activated. It still is activated. I don't play about my family. I don't play about people that I love. And so I was dropping my son off at tennis. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm sitting in the parking lot. I'm on the phone with her. She's devastated. She's crying. I could hear the children in the background. Um, she was desperate to get AJ's mom, Pam, to her house, to be with the kids, to be with her, to console her. And so I just asked her, do you want me to activate? And, she sort of whispered, yes. And so I immediately got off the phone. I think I probably just sat in silence and, burst into tears. And I spent about 5 minutes just sort of, you know, devastated myself because this is my sister's best friend. The last time I had seen AJ was about 10 months before for my sister's 40th birthday, right? So the last memories I have of her is in the celebration of my sister's life, and seeing her babies there. And it was here at my mom's house where I am now. So, all of those memories are flooding in. I'm thinking about her children. She has 4 babies, Isaac, Izzy, Africa, and Titus. And so I took that moment, and then I just opened up my cell phone and started calling as whoever I could call. The first call I made was to a dear sister friend of mine, Latasha Brown. People may know Latasha as the founder of Black Voters Matter. Latasha and I have been good friends for many, many years since doing a lot of Katrina recovery work. So I called her. She's a big sister to me. She immediately called Ben Crump on my behalf. And then I started sending out text messages to, many of my friend groups, which Savitra, you're part of, just sort of desperately letting people know what had happened and trying to figure out, what the next phone calls would be. I'm grateful to Ben Crump, who got on the phone with me pretty immediately. He was like, Ben was on his way from another thing, as he always is, actually boarding a plane, and was like, I'll be off this plane in 2 hours. And by the time he got off the plane, he had identified a local attorney that he had worked with, who also worked on Trayvon Martin closely with him, Anthony Thomas, and had already deployed them to my sister's house. So that was the first thing, was sort of to get some legal representation and action. The other thing was my sister had started making phone calls to find out about AJ's body and just sort of the logistics that happened after a murder. When she called the sheriff's office, she was told that they don't work on the weekends, and she could get information Monday through Friday from 9 to 5. That pissed me off.
I know it
Um,
did.
Like,
and
this is not a human being we are talking about
right,
here.
and not a family, and not 4 children, and like, just it was so it was so it was just so disrespectful of the situation. There was just sort of no care given by the police department in that moment, in the coroner's office. So that was how that phone call went. And the other thing that really bothered me was there was also no local news coverage. So I started looking up to see, if the local Orlando affiliate or Gainesville affiliate, or even if the local Ocala newspaper had said anything about it, and it was nowhere. The only mention on that Saturday that we could find was a mention on the sheriff's website, that this had occurred. It was like an Instagram post or something like that. So that really pissed us off, and lit a fire, even more of a fire under us, because I think we were afraid in that moment, not only that Susan Lawrence might try to use stand your ground, but also that it was not going to be picked up, either locally or nationally, and that there would be no attention given, to what had occurred. That's
Wow. And had you not done that work, the likelihood of them just acting like nothing happened.
Yeah, another untold story, right? I think that that's what people think about. And it makes me think about that community there, because Susan seemed like the eyeball out. Everyone else, again, irregardless of race, it was Susan who was the problem. Everyone else, like, let kids be kids, let them
Yes.
play. And
yeah.
you got there on the ground. How was the impact of the community, of that neighborhood?
Yeah, it was wild because, again, Susan wasn't arrested on that night.
Mm.
Susan went home to her house and came out and had coffee on her porch the next morning. The neighborhood that had just literally been traumatized was setting up, like, a little altar, like we do, and adding, stuffed animals and candles. And Susan would come out every morning and put it in the trash.
Mm.
Her home was vandalized, by some of the, I don't know who, but yeah, it was really, really, really disheartening. So that, coupled with the way that the police have responded to the family that weekend, had us really afraid um that Susan would go free, and there would be no justice in this case. So yeah, so the first few days were full of a lot of anxiety around that. I can say pretty quickly the local community started to organize protests demanding her arrest. Um, So a lot of that was organized inside of Black churches in this community, the local NAACP, and a lot of folks, other folks like that, did that work on the ground while we were dealing with literally like changing diapers and trying to plan a funeral and trying
Hmm.
to, locate her body and all the sort of basic things that have to happen in the wake of a tragedy like this.
And I am curious to know, when I first started watching it, I don't think I knew that a large portion of the documentary was going to be based or told through body camera
Yes,
and footage.
so powerful.
How was it trying to get that footage? I always think about all the blocks and just the barriers that it takes to get that footage, and even the fact that the footage exists still. How was that process and actually getting that footage from the police officers?
Yeah, actually, it wasn't too bad. So, the Freedom of Information Act makes
Hmm.
all of that footage public record. And as citizens, we have access to all public records. So the first time I knew of body cam footage, or even occurred to me to think about the body cam footage, I was watching a local news report about it. And I saw these clips of the body cam footage. And so spoke with the family attorney who, is also thinking longer term about civil cases and things like that. And again, we were thinking about the DOJ. And so he immediately put in a FOIA request to the sheriff's department, and we got back was like a thumb drive, and the request was pretty comprehensive. So he requested all footage of anything related to Susan Lawrence going back 2 to 3 years. And so what we got back was not only the body cam footage for all of her calls. And remember, Susan was the only one that ever called the police until that night. So she was the only one that ever called. So all of Susan's calls, we got the body cam footage for the night of, which is horrific. And we also received the her interrogation footage. So it was sort of jumbled. It was a jumbled up mess when we received it. And so my sister Gita and Nakan started to go through it and sort of put it in a sort of sequential order. And I think that's when they discovered, wow, there is a whole story here about the lead up to what happened. In a way that we never get to see before. And we talk a lot about the choice to stay in the body cam footage as opposed to taking a more traditional route with sort of talking heads, retelling the story. I think that is why this film is so powerful, is because Gita and our editor very really committed to stay in the body cam footage and trust the audience. And I have to say, I'll say it here, like if those of you have watched this movie, the footage itself, the material itself is stunning, right? Like the fact that you see the interrogation and you see one of the detectives read the letter that she wrote to the kids. And there's all these things that just don't feel like they should be there. It almost feels staged. I kind of described this when I first watched an early cut as like a Blair Witch project. They're trying to
I
figure
didn't want to
out if
use
this
Blair Witch Project, but that's literally
it's a horror
way
movie.
more
It's a
better.
horror movie. It's
Yes,
like Blair Witch,
exactly.
Stephen King's The It, right?
Yes.
And Susan is and all the children know. And in some ways, Gita will say, like, she did commit to telling this like a horror film.
Hmm.
Um, the composer, everyone sort of, took this raw material. And it's not adult, it's not manipulated in any way, but it plays like a horror film. And I think they went with that.
And that's what
And
makes it so powerful. Like to me, the most powerful thing was the fact that full story was told through body cam. And not only was it the number of times that she called, it was the stuff she was complaining about, but it was also the neighbors being like, they're kids. Like every neighbor just like, they're kids. And then you have the kids themselves who are like, we're just 11. Like they're just like, we don't even understand why this lady is so upset. And like just those pieces being so like just genuine, true, this is what it is. I think that is what, in my opinion, made that documentary, the movie, so powerful because you really can't manipulate that. That is actual body cam footage. And to me, like that made no, there's no question of why it is a number one movie because it was the traditional way of a documentary. And again, it's just true footage that you can't deny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to lean into that, this idea of like horror, like a horror movie, but actually real life documentary. Because some people are online and they're essentially saying, "Don't watch this. This is like, there's like this audience where they feel like, oh, black trauma. We can't keep watching black trauma." But the difference between the Blair Witch Project, that was a horror movie, and real life is that this is real life and this is
Real
someone's
life.
story. But we'd love to know how you respond to people who say, oh, I cannot watch this. This is,
Yeah.
black trauma on full display.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I understand. You know what I'm saying? I understand. I understand why people feel that way. It is hard to watch. It's not an easy thing to digest. What I say to those folks though is that this movie is art for sure, but it's also activism. And when we put together the rough cut, Gita, myself, we took it to AJ's mom. And she had blessed us moving forward with something. She didn't know what it was. She didn't know what format it would come back to her in. She knew we were working on something. And when she saw it, she was physically ill. It was very hard for her to get through it. And when we finally did get a chance to talk about it, she had spent time in her prayer closet and she was adamant that the world needed to see it. I describe it as a Mamie Till moment, in the same way Emmett Till's mother made a decision to make sure he had an open casket at his funeral and she invited the press in. So this takes me back to my master's
Yeah.
thesis, right? And here we are talking about a mother making that decision again, for the world to see the truth of what happened to their baby. And I have been with Pam. Pam is now like absorbed into our family, and the children are, totally a part of our family. They didn't have a very big extended family, so they've really become ours. And sat with her through both the trial and the sentencing. And when we got the 25 years, it was a really empty feeling.
Hmm.
It didn't feel like justice at all. But there is something about this movie that feels like justice. It feels like AJ has been vindicated, right? Because the truth of what led to that night is there for folks to see with their own eyes.
Yes,
It's
yes.
undeniable. I think about women like Sandra Bland and Breonna Taylor and all the questions that come when Black women are murdered by the state or Black women are murdered in sort of these race-based violence. And oftentimes, we're questioned our motives. Well, why did she go over there, to the house? And so this felt like justice for AJ. This felt like justice for AJ, right? This felt like vindication of her motives and her character. And her right as a mother, as a Black mother, to protect her children. So, I think Pam is one of the bravest people that I know to set aside her own grief. And she tells the story about how her and AJ would talk about, her future and the things that she would do in the world. And she would tell her mother, she would actually tell my sister all the time, the world will know my name. And so this film felt like a promise kept to AJ. And so for the folks who are struggling to watch the film, I give them that story. I try to share that story in media and in my conversation. So folks understand this is not just trauma porn. This was a mother's decision. And it is a call to action. And for those who can't, because I know this is also triggering, so many people in our communities are victims of gun violence, right? So this is triggering on so many different levels. But this is not just about trauma porn. This is not true crime, even though it's labeled that on Netflix. This was an intentional decision to vindicate AJ and tell her truth and to make sure that the world knows her name and her death was not in vain.
Absolutely.
Now, I tried to cheat a little bit earlier, so you don't know this. I tried to cheat and find out. We talked about the title of this movie, and I was telling her a lot of the comments I would see on social media was either people was a lot of back and forth on the triggering not only of the documentary and the footage, but the actual title. The title being The Perfect Neighbor. And I wanted to get Tamika's feedback, but also her thoughts on was it intentional to name it The Perfect Neighbor? Because it's been so much just back and forth on social media about it and kind of the story behind naming it The Perfect Neighbor.
Yeah, it's so interesting. That was not, I wasn't expecting that. I actually wasn't expecting that comment. I was expecting the Black trauma porn,
Hmm.
folks to have that opinion. I wasn't expecting that one, and only because Susan says it. Susan says, "I'm the perfect neighbor," in one of her interactions with the police. And I think why we chose that because that was her mindset, right? It speaks to, I think, white fragility. It speaks to white supremacist delusion, and how Susan saw herself vis-a-vis this community. And so that is why we went with that. Those are Susan's own words. She says it very clearly to the police. I'm the perfect neighbor, right? And so, I think that it's meant to be a little bit of an agitator
Hmm.
to the audience because it comes out of Susan's own mouth. And so that is why we use that word. As far as I'm concerned, my girl across the street, Phyllis, the
Everybody,
perfect neighbor.
everybody was like, Phyllis, this woman right here.
Phyllis.
This is what an ally looks like. This is somebody that's 10 toes
That is what I
down.
am now. Let me tell you, that's my girl right there. She's a true ally. That's what allyship looks like. And so we love Phyllis down.
Yes.
Yeah, it was I didn't actually expect for that much, I guess, conversation around the title because I got it. I heard it, and I'm watching it. I'm like, she literally just called herself the perfect neighbor who's called the cops 20 something times. But I did think it was interesting that a lot of people, it was a lot of conversation around the title.
Yeah,
Yes.
the movie this is a lot of emotion, and I think that's the part that I keep saying is it's actually not that violent, although racism is violent, although weaponizing the police is a form of violence. It is actually emotional. And I think it brings up so many emotions for people. So even like you said, the title, Sheena, is just making people mad, and so that is what I think is really why the film is so powerful is I don't think people have watched anything that's impacted them so emotionally in a very, very long time. We've become numb.
Absolutely. I think I had text you. I said the last time I was emotionally moved by a story that someone had to piece it together for me because I was like, too young to really have been there was Ava DuVernay, when they see us, where it was telling their story. So I think that this story was for everyone. It brought us not only back to that place, but the climate that we're in today, the stories to come, unfortunately, right? Like who's going to tell these people's stories? How do we stand in the gap, right, for them? Now, one thing I have to ask, I think everybody wants to know this, is how are the kids doing? And everyone has been posting the son, like quoting the son. I think it also got me too when he was asked, "Are you hurt?" And he said, "No, but my heart is broken." He
Yeah.
broke my heart hearing that. And I know millions of other people's hearts at the same time. People want to know, where are these kids?
Yeah. So that when I watched the rough cut, I think that's when I broke my remote. I think I threw the remote across the room and like had to pause and I think come back an hour later because these are also my nieces and nephews.
Yes.
So the question around the kids is always a hard one and a kind of our least favorite because there's just no way to give a good answer that makes people feel better.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
they are dealing with a devastating trauma that they will carry for the rest of their lives. Even the judge in his sentencing of Susan, that was one of his reasons why, right? Like, you did this knowing there were four babies, right, on the other side of that door, with their mama. And so, they have their good days, their bad days. They range in age from 3 to 13. Titus, who is the youngest, has a learning disability. And so, he's autistic. And so, how he processed it as a 3-year-old with autism is different. How his sister Africa has processed it is different from, how Izzy has processed it, who was standing right next to her.
Yeah.
And it's different from how Isaac has processed it, who tried to give her CPR and run for help. So, the kids have had, a myriad of emotions. They're definitely, receiving lots of care and therapy. They've been able to go to some trauma camps in the summertime and be with other children that have also had these kinds of experiences. But it's hard. It's hard when this kind of trauma happens at such a young age. It becomes part of your foundational development. So how are they today is different from how they might be tomorrow, is different from how they'll process it in 6 months. I will tell you this about AJ, though. AJ put so much into these babies. She left so much inside of them. Her kids were in private school. She's a manager at McDonald's with kids in private school. So just think about the kind of sacrifice and intentionality she had around their academics. And so these kids are pretty consistent honor roll students. A lot of times it maybe show up more in kind of behavior issues. But I'm proud to say, like, Titus, who was 3 at the time, is now in kindergarten. He's in an integrated classroom, and he is reading on a 3rd grade reading level.
Yes.
Right. So, she just left so much inside of them. And so 2 of them are with their dad, and 2 of them are with Pam, AJ's mom, who also gave up her entire life to relocate to Ocala, to really become the rock for the kids.
That's wonderful. I think that I speak for all the other viewers when I say that we hope that they don't carry any guilt and that they know that it was solely on this woman, Susan, and her actions. That's what I always think about when because kids can like just harbor such guilt and they think it might be their fault that this happened, and when that's so not the case. So it's really good to hear that they're doing well.
Yeah, I'm shaking my head because they have those feelings. I don't know if you heard what Reverend Sharpton said to them in the movie, but he told them, do not blame yourself. Your mother, made a choice and she decided to stand up for you and to remember that. And
Yeah,
so we try to keep putting those words into them. We try to keep putting that affirmation into them, but spiritually and inside themselves, they're going to go through those
those
emotions.
feelings.
Our hope is that the love, the support, the therapeutic, care is there to help them process.
Absolutely. Now, The Perfect Neighbor premiered at essentially #1 on Netflix. Um,
Crazy.
Again, you've been going to film festivals, you guys have been winning. How has that been, right? Like this story was put together to just tell someone's story, and now the world is responding in this way to that documentary. How has it felt? Are you surprised? Or did you know, like, oh yeah, we knew that this was going to grab at all the hearts and all the eyes across the world?
I want to act like I'm humble, but I'm not. I knew. I knew from the
That's
rep.
what I'm saying. Talk that. Yes.
I want to act humble, but I knew for real because what I say all the time is that nobody cares about a dead Black girl. That's not why we're having this conversation. We're having this conversation because my sister put her foot in this directive. She took this material and she put everything she had into it. She put her back into it. And the editing and the direction are perfect.
Mm-hmm.
with the material that we gave. And I believe that the material was a spiritual gift. I believe that AJ was working that material. That's what I believe,
Yes.
right? And I believe all of those things came together. My advocacy, my sisters, artistic ability to take this footage and turn it into something powerful. That is why people care.
Mm-hmm.
So from the rough cut, what I told Geetha, because I think I'm like the first person who saw it after it came out the editing booth, my brother and me. And the first thing I said to her is, I have a degree in art history. So I'm going to say this as an expert, right? In culture and in art and in activism. I told her that this film will be taught in film school and it will win every award, hands down. And she burst into tears because she wasn't sure, what this was. It was just coming out of the lab at that point, and she's just getting early looks. And my first response is, this will be taught in film school. This is a game changer. The way this film is constructed is a game changer, and it will win all awards. I'm so excited to say we swept the Critic Choice nominations. We got nominated for everything we could get nominated for. There's still other awards to be had as we're on this journey. And not only did we premiere #1 on Netflix, but the numbers came back last week. Second up was Women in Cabin 10. I think they did about 350 million minutes. We
Mm-hmm.
broke the internet and did 1.5 billion.
Yes. And
Wow.
counting.
And counting. And
Yes.
counting.
And
That
counting.
was in week 1. And I want to be clear, across all platforms, not Netflix, all streaming platforms. So Peacock, Hulu, Disney Plus, Amazon, across all platforms, #1. And so, yeah, I can't be humble and act like I didn't know what we had. I knew what we had, and it just was really affirming of how powerful the directing and the editing and the material, which again, I believe was just too perfect to not be, did not have God and our ancestors, hand on that.
Yeah, Takema, I must say, you, your team, your sister, the amazing work. But even with everything you just said, the thing that it comes back to me is the fact it's almost like you all kept the promise to AJ, which was the world will know my name.
That's
Absolutely.
what keeps us going. We say it in every single talk back. This was a promise kept to her mother and a promise kept to AJ, from that very first phone call when my sister asked me, do you want me to get busy? Right? Like, it's been on and popping since then.
Yeah.
And till the wheel fall off, and I finally, I would tell people ask me how I feel. I finally feel like I can stop moving a little bit, because I feel accomplished, that I kept my promise.
Absolutely. Now, I would love to know like what's next. First of all, I'm like Netflix, where is the five, film deal? I
We're
mean,
working on it. We're working on
I need to know where it's at,
it.
Reed. Because the numbers are in. We need
The
more
numbers are in.
storytelling. But what is next for you for Standing the Gap for High Cotton Productions? Do you want to collab with Soledad O'Brien's Productions and Message Pictures?
Yeah.
What's next?
No, first of all, Soledad's an amazing friend and partner and sister girl, and she's such a girl's girl. So I just want to shout out Soledad for like her love and support. She's just like that person you call and ask her to show up, and she's there. So it's been amazing for her to lend her credibility to this film and invest in this film and help us get it out the door, and on its way. So what is next is an impact campaign, which I am producing for the film. We want to make sure the film isn't just seen on Netflix. It's not just entertainment, but how can we really turn this film into action? So I am leading our impact campaign, which will include a year and a half of a screening tour where we can take this to universities, law schools, as well as, churches, anywhere and everywhere people want to gather, be in community and talk about it. So we're going to be launching a major screening tour next year with curriculum for undergrads, law school students, and law school students as well, and actually looking to also use this film to support police training. So partnering with some organizations that are going to also help us use this as a tool for training law enforcement. In addition, Standing in the Gap, which, you know, actually preceded The Perfect Neighbor, was created in the days and weeks after AJ was murdered. Again, my background is in philanthropy and in moving resources, and I can't tell you how frustrating it was to be directly impacted and not be able to move a dime in terms of major philanthropy. So Standing in the Gap now exists at the Greater Washington Community Foundation. It is a donor advised fund to support families impacted by racial violence. So we're able to support families up to $250,000, so $250,000 per incident. And we're also able to, through the fund, support organizers on the ground, right? Because getting out on the street and protesting and organizing takes resources, takes money. So because of that frustration, Standing in the Gap was created. And, I've had had some, incredible investment in that. Our goal with Standing in the Gap is to actually endow it into perpetuity. We have a $12 million endowment goal that will allow us to do both our grant making and have our operational needs met. So we're asking folks to support that. If you're moved by this film and you want to support families like AJ who might be affected by race-based violence in the future, Standing the Gap becomes that resource. And the next for us, Message Pictures, which is which is Geeta and Nakan and Alisa Sam Pollard's production company, who we partner with on this. It's definitely, going to be doing more things. I don't know if folks know they did Eyes on the Prize earlier this year and Come Hell or High Water. So this is their work. They're in this space of producing these powerful stories. And High Cotton Productions will continue to work with them as an impact campaign producer for their work. So, this is the first of many projects that we're looking forward to producing together.
Well,
Wow.
Takema, it's all of this is amazing. I know for one, am looking forward to what's to come and to see how we can support your work across not only Standing in the Gap to High Cotton Productions to getting the word out there, whatever needs to be done, because it's so important. And we could only be so lucky that individuals like you are at the forefront of this work.
Thank you so much. Thank y'all so much. This has just been a good time to spend and share. And yeah, just like from the very first phone call, like can't stop, won't stop. We gotta be our sisters' keepers. We gotta show up for our family. Our mantra at Standing in the Gap is "We got us." And in a moment like this, when folks are losing their jobs and being kidnapped off the streets, we gotta really live that. We really have to take care of one another and show up for one another. And I only hope that that's what I did.
You
Absolutely.
did.
You did.
Exactly.
And where can people reach you as we wrap up here? Where can people reach you most easiest? I know you're on social media, so we'll definitely share your social media channels, but where's the best place to reach you and follow your work?
Yeah, I think the best place is me on Instagram at I am Takema. There's also my website, iamtakema.com, but you can also go over to the Standing in the Gap website to find out all about what we're doing, the other artists that we're collaborating with, because again, culture is a big part of what we do and how we help people, feel this work and not just, contemplate this work. So Standing in the Gap is the home of the Impact Campaign. You can find me there. And on my website, iamtakema.com, as well as on Instagram.
Well, Takema,
Takima, thank you so, so
thank
much.
you.
Like, absolutely. We usually ask our guests as we end about their rich lesson, but good gosh.
You have gave a lot
Look,
of
yes.
lessons, but even how you ended it, I think is like a true rich lesson for people to carry on with them,
Yes.
really standing in the gap for others. Um, so we thank you for being a guest on this podcast, and we look forward to having you back on in the future.
Absolutely. Can't wait to come back.
Thank
Thank you.